Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to Reserved Investments, and thank you for joining me. If you are watching this video, note that you are watching part 3 of my infamous 16,000 subscriber Q&A series. So this whole video is question and answer. We are going to get right into the questions because, again, the 16,000 subscriber Q&A is massive. It's going to take me a while to get through all of these questions. That's why I always break these Q&A sessions up. So without further ado, here is the first question. Sean, I keep seeing Longaberger baskets in some of your newest videos. Does this mean you are going to finally be doing a video on Longaberger baskets? The answer is yes. And if you don't know why this is relevant, back in the early 2000s, there was a massive speculative bubble that opened up in the market for collectible Longaberger baskets. Exactly what I am holding up on camera right now. Well, spoiler alert, the Kimmies, because it wasn't just Timmys, it was Kimmies really, that propelled this market to new heights, they got slapped in the face with a stale donut. And spoiler alert number 2, it didn't exactly end well for the Longaberger Basket Company either, because believe it or not, they ended up going bankrupt in the process. So it's going to be a great video when that video premieres. Please take the time to watch it if you have any interest in understanding speculative bubbles that make up the entire antiques and collectibles trade. You know, guys, I've said this once, I'll say it again. If you really want to learn the true history of the antiques and collectibles trade, like in the last 100 years, just study the amount of speculative bubbles that have come and went. If you really want to focus just on one time period in the antiques and collectibles trade, and you want to learn about speculative bubbles in general, just study what happened in the 80s and 90s. The 1980s, the 1990s, even the early 2000s, they were a fascinating time period in the overall antiques and collectibles trade, where transitions were the norm, where we had the internet rising up, where we had people on Main Street wanting to invest like people on Wall Street. And as a result, this is where the antiques and collectibles trade first became a plethora of financial investment, not only from very wealthy individuals, but also just the everyday average consumer that really was interested by alternate asset investing. That's why I spend so much time on this channel warning you guys about the risks of how these markets are unregulated and how much money flows through some of these speculative bubbles and who profits from them and who loses. It's very fascinating. So I hope that answers your question. That video should be up within a couple of months. I know that seems like a long time. You guys got to understand I'm a part-time YouTuber here. I do my best, okay? Now we're going to get to another question. And this is a great question, and I do want to answer this one in full. Sean, you've talked an awful lot about your time early on eBay in previous videos. Do you have any tips for people who want to become big sellers on eBay in the year 2024? Okay, this is where we have to have a candid conversation. And again, I don't mean to insult anybody in this particular video. I want to make that very clear. If you think I'm being very direct here, I'm trying not to cut anybody up. I'm trying not to throw salt on the wounds that are already out there. But the problem with the reselling business, eBay thrifters, retail arbitrage, scalping. I know you guys love that word. I hate it, but we're going to use it just for dramatic effect. The problem with these particular activities is that everybody is already doing it. That doesn't mean that there's not opportunity out there. Don't misconstrue what I'm saying. But if you log on to Facebook, if you log on to Instagram, even if you log on to Twitter, YouTube, TikTok, you're going to see a plethora of people telling other people that, hey, if you want to make money in reselling, if you want to make money in the antiques and collectibles trade, I'm going to show you how. And a lot of this information that is out there, I honestly want to state that 50 to 70% of it is complete and utter BS. 30% of it is really good information. There are YouTubers out there that do this particular space justice. I want to give credit to some of them. I'm going to name right now Phoenix Resale. He does an excellent job in this particular space, showing the pros and cons of flipping these particular items on the market, engaging in reselling, engaging in eBay thrifting, speculation, the whole 9 yards. Unfortunately, there's a lot of other people out there that make it seem so easy. Because again, guys, remember, if you create content on TikTok, if you create content on YouTube, you get revenue from that content. As a result, a lot of that information is very bad. It's just like if you go to YouTube and you type in Pokemon investing, if you type in Magic the Gathering finance, if you type in Lego investing, you're going to get hit with a plethora of information. And don't get me wrong, there's some good people out there doing the right thing, explaining the risks, explaining how these markets work. But for every good person out there that's like me, trying to warn you guys of what's involved in these markets over the short term and over the long term, there's about 5 other people that are telling you that you can make easy money, that Lego is going to the moon, that Pokemon's going to always go to the moon, that Magic the Gathering is just going to come roaring back, which it most likely will at some point, but is the opportunity cost of storing all this stuff in a closet, in a basement, until it does come roaring back, is that really worth it over the short term or over the long term? So where I'm going with this, if you want to get involved in reselling, if you want to get involved in eBay thrifting, speculation, whatever it is, please start slow. Please do not quit your day job. Please do not start spending a ton of money on this stuff thinking that it's very easy to sell it, it's very easy to flip it, because as we have more and more people coming into the market, there's a lot of product out there that is being hoarded, that is pretty much just sitting idle, because everybody is just trying to prime this stuff up to the next level. There's a lot of pump and dumps going on. There's a lot of starry-eyed speculators getting involved in these markets. And again, if you really want to learn these markets, it takes time, it takes effort. You have to put yourself out there, and you're going to have to determine if the opportunity cost, also known as the time value of money, is really worth it. Because in most cases, some of you can work a part-time job. Maybe you can even work overtime at the job that you have. If you're making $20, $30, $40 an hour overtime, or hell, even heaven forbid, you go work for Papa Bezos in his warehouse where you got to piss in a bottle, but you're making $20 to $25 an hour, in most cases, you will make money more that way than getting into these markets. And that's where I caution a lot of people. You know, it's just like this old adage that I say repeatedly on this channel. Back when I started on eBay, nobody had smartphones. There was no Facebook. There was no YouTube. There was no TikTok. It was down and dirty capitalism. You went out to the flea market. You went out to the yard sale. If somebody put out a plethora of video games, or even, heaven forbid, vintage glass bottles, if you had the knowledge, you bought that stuff, you made money on it. If you didn't have the knowledge, perhaps you passed on some of that stuff. Perhaps you overpaid for it. It was much more harder to make it in the trade back then, but there was less competition. Today, everybody knows the value of this stuff. Anybody can go to Goodwill. Anybody can go to flea markets. Anybody can go to an antique mart. And if they find something, all they got to do is know how to search for that item on eBay or even Google it, and they can pretty much assess the value and determine, hey, this is being sold at a substantial discount right now. I can buy this, take it home and flip it and make my money. You have to also be very careful, not only whose advice you take, but how you interpret a lot of this advice. If you go on the Facebook group, eBay Thrifters, there's good advice in that particular group, and there's also some bad advice. And a lot of people get caught in the trap where they see some of these individuals in that group posting awesome finds. Like, there are some individuals that go out, they get lucky, they buy like a vintage video game collection for $100 and they're able to flip it almost immediately for like $2,000 to $3,000. And some of these individuals get it in their head, well, if I can find a collection like that just once a month, I'm going to do okay. Not realizing that in today's day and age, for the most part, that is really an unrealistic standard to strive for, because you also have to remember the people that have this stuff. If you're somebody that has a vintage video game collection in your house, maybe your kid went off to college and you have this stuff and you're going to sell it, most likely you know that it has value because you yourself can go to eBay, you yourself can go to the internet, you can research this stuff, or even if you want to use me as a consultant, I do get emails, I get hunted down on social media. Hey, Sean, I read an article that you wrote for Antiques and Auction News on video games. I found this lot of video games in my nephew's room, my grandson's room. What can I get for this realistically if I sold it online? So there is information out there that helps both groups. That's what makes this so complex. So that's where I would tell you, don't quit your day job. Start slow. Be careful what advice you take, and also understand the opportunity cost and the time, the value of your own time that you're going to be putting into this. Because in a lot of cases, I see a lot of people get sucked down this rabbit hole where they would be much better off just working a part-time job. They would make more money. And then they get sucked into this, and now they're bitter, they're angry. They think that it's them that is the problem, when in all reality, it is not. It's just where we are in the year 2024, where everybody wants to get into this market, and there's a ton of competition, and everybody, almost everybody, knows the value of this stuff. So just be careful, start slow, put yourself out there, and just see if it's for you before you do something drastic like quit your day job, before you do something insane like set up an LLC when you didn't even turn a profit yet. Be very careful. That's the best advice I can give you, my friend. Next question. Sean, what are 3 collecting categories that you see a bright future in? Seems like most of the content you produce is negative towards non-antique items. Here we go. I must hear that 100 times a day. Let me quick explain my position on that. You guys know that this is a channel devoted to collectible finance. We look at short-term and long-term investing in the overall antiques and collectibles trade on this particular YouTube channel. Now, with that being said, for the most part, antiques are rooted in history, collectibles are rooted in nostalgia. So if it seems like I am being very bearish against collectibles in a lot of my videos, it is because if somebody put a gun to my head and told me I had to turn a profit in 20 years, long-term investing in any categories in the antiques and collectibles trade, I really hate to tell you guys, I know the Pokemon crowd is going to hate me on this, I'm going to the high-end historical antique side of the trade. I know I can make money over 20 years in those markets. When we look 20 years out, most collecting categories, there is potential there. Obviously, I would never ever steer you incorrectly. There is potential there. I myself put money in those markets. But the markets are less predictable than what I see if you put in front of me a certain high-end first edition collectible book, a historical document, certain very rare coins and currency. I would rather bet on those particular items over the long term than almost anything on the pop culture side of the equation. And this is what triggers the Timmys, Kimmys, and Poindexters. I know every time I put out a video on Pokemon, some little Timmy in the Pokemon community has to do a reaction video to it where reserved investments is wrong. He's too bearish on Pokemon. Not understanding the risks of investing in these markets over the long term. Look, guys, just between me and you, I love Pokemon. I love vintage Star Wars. I love comic books. I love all of these markets, vintage video games, all of them. All is what I am doing here on reserved investments is showing you how these markets actually work over the short term and over the the long term. Can you make money and invest in pop culture collectibles? The answer is yes. I do it daily. You can make money in these markets, but most of you have more of a Ponzi scheme, Ponzi dream mindset. You're not applying critical thought and financial thinking to investing in the antiques and collectibles trade. And if you want to be successful, if you want to be able to outsmart a lot of the market manipulators out there, a lot of the Timmys, Kimmys, and Poindexters, you must apply financial basics and an understanding of finance, economics, and business to these markets to be successful. And a lot of you over the last 5 years, over the last 10 years, you got very lucky because you were buying and hoarding factory sealed product that just happened to go up in value. It's just like I tell the video game collectors. You guys got lucky because there was a wave of demand in that market that propelled a lot of your items to the stratosphere. And what is it that I also tell you guys? With the Wada Games bubble, with everything that happened with great video games, you should have sold into the hype. And a lot of you did not listen to me, and now you're down, what, 60, 70, 80? In certain cases, there are clients I have that come to me for help through my consulting business. They are down 90% asking me, Sean, when's the market going to come back for this great video game that I bought at the height of the bubble? And I have to explain to them, I'm sorry, it's never going to get that high again. You do realize that. It's most likely never going to get that high again. You're going to have to look at the market and see when you want to cut your losses on these particular items. Would I tell you to sell now? It depends on what you bought. It depends on what you paid for these items. Now, with that being said, I want to answer your question because there are some collecting categories that I do see a bright future for, and they're across the plethora. They're across both the antiques and collectibles spectrum. So here we go. On the antique side of the equation, obviously, truly rare and scarce historical documents is something that I would always recommend. Certain rare coins, certain rare banknotes, pieces of currency. On the collectible side of the equation, I do see an opportunity in a lot of pop culture markets, whether it's video games, whether it's comic books, whether it's vintage toys, whether it's collectible card games. The thing is, you can't go all in these markets. You have to understand how to analyze these markets. Like I get into a lot of debates with comic book collectors. A lot of comic book collectors, especially those of you that are going after Bronze Age, Copper Age, Modern Age comic books, a lot of you guys are starry-eyed speculators. If you don't believe me, go back and watch the videos that I have done on the optimal collecting grade. The optimal collecting grade, when applied to rare coins, currency, comic books, established vintage sports cards, if you apply those core concepts to analyzing the market dynamics for a lot of these great collectibles, you will do okay. If you know what you're doing, you take it slow, you buy into the market at the right time, and you understand the risks. There still is opportunity in the vintage comic book market. There's opportunity in the vintage video game market. There's opportunity in the collectible card game market. And there's opportunity in the vintage toy market. The problem is, especially when we look at vintage toys, you have to be careful because those items are inherently fragile. Case in point, I'm on a lot of the vintage Star Wars, vintage toy collecting, buying, selling forums on Facebook. And somebody posted an AFA graded 80, 12-back Stormtrooper action figure from Star Wars. And they wanted like $2,800 for it. And I'm looking at the figure, and the figure is pretty much all yellowed and discolored. I'm sorry to tell you, even though AFA, who is very reputable company, even though they graded that at an AFA 80, I hate to tell you, no one is going to pay a premium for an ugly, yellowed, discolored action figure sitting in a bubble encased in a piece of plastic simply because the AFA label says 80, near mint condition. You guys need to realize there are risks in some of these markets that you are not inherently akin to, that you guys are not, for the most part, paying attention to. And that's going to cost you dearly. down the line. So that's why I tell you guys, when it comes to products like vintage Nike Air Jordans, vintage toys, there are risks in those markets. Be very careful. So I hope that answers your question. Again, for the record, I do see opportunity in pop culture collectibles. I just think most of the internet is way too bullish on these items, especially from the modern era. I'll give you one other piece of advice. I firmly believe once video games go fully digital to the point where you can't even buy a console anymore with a cartridge slot or a CD drive, I honestly think that is going to create a lot of demand for a lot of these vintage, even modern era video games at present time. The problem is a lot of people are already hoarding this stuff. So you really have to make a calculated guess. If you have $1,000, let's say, after you pay your bills for the month, instead of putting $1,000 in modern era factory sealed products, I would tell you, hey, out of that $1,000, if you truly want to invest it, put $700 or $800 in a well-diversified portfolio, or even in an S&P 500 index fund. Take what's left, the $200 to $300 you got left. If you want to play with that, you want to buy Pokemon products, Magic the Gathering, video games, okay, you still invested 70 to 80% of that $1,000. So if you're only putting $200 to $300 out of $1,000 readily available for investing in these markets, that's an acceptable risk to me. I know that there are financial planners, financial professionals out there that watch my channel. Their heads probably exploded now that I said that, because putting that much in collectibles does seem like a lot. But that's my advice for the people out there that think that these markets are going to go to the moon. Don't bet the damn farm. That's all that I'm telling you. Next question. Sean, what are your thoughts on the market for vintage YuGiOh? Specifically, just the first set for both sealed and graded cards. I did not sell into the hype during 2021 and have continued to hold, hoping for another mania. Okay, guys, you need to understand, you guys got to get the years 2020, 2021 out of your brains. We're never, ever, most likely in the near future, going to see a run up in prices like that. As a matter of fact, I honestly think when we get 20, 30, 40 years out, that is always going to be a blip on the radar where people are going to look back, they're going to do price history, and they're going to go, oh, wait a minute, that high price was achieved back during the pandemic. Remember that? When we were all young and stupid and we were stuck indoors getting free government money? We got to remove those sales from the sale history because they're pretty much screwing up the aggregate average. So you guys have got to get the years 2020 and 2021 out of your brains and realize how these markets are going to work now going forward. So do I see opportunity in the YuGiOh market? The answer is yes. Do I like it as much as Pokemon? Do I like it as much as Magic the Gathering? The answer is no. Do I put it on par with Pokemon or Magic the Gathering? I do not. I look at YuGiOh as a distant third. If you want to put money in it, if you have a passion towards it, you do you. Is it okay if you're going after the first set, both graded, sealed, whoever you want to buy it? The answer is yes, as long as you're not betting the farm on this. If you like YuGiOh, you do you. But I do not see as much potential in YuGiOh, even the first release, as I do with Pokemon and even beta or alpha or even unlimited Magic the Gathering cards. Next question. Sean, love your work. You really helped make me smarter with my investments. I have a question that's been on my mind a while. I see local comic shops, Lego shops, retro video game shops opening again and again. I know you have mentioned before to watch Alpha Investments, Rudy, video on brick and mortar shops, but I'm curious on your take, okay? I have done videos on this myself. The reason why I tell you to watch Alpha Investments videos on this is he does a much deeper analysis. Some of his videos on these talking points are, I think, an hour long, and they are spectacular. I honestly stopped doing videos on this because I think Alpha Investments does such a good job on these talking points when it comes to should an individual open up a collectible shop, a collectible retail brick and mortar store. In my opinion, the answer is no, especially if it is in a niche market. And for the record, if I read through your question, this is what you specifically ask. I asked this because I imagined opening up a vintage big bookstore specializing in science fiction and fantasy, but I don't think it's a particularly good idea given the time and monetary investment that it would take. The answer is you answered your own question. Please continue to listen to that little voice inside of you that's telling you it is a bad idea. In this case, I assure you, it is a bad idea. The time sink involved in doing something like this, you will be working 60 to 70 hours a week. You will have no life, and most likely, you will be on welfare and food stamps as a result. The chances of you turning this into a viable business is slim to none if you are utilizing a brick and mortar retail store. If you want to sell science fiction and fantasy books, start putting yourself out there, buy them, flip them on eBay, flip them on the internet, see how you do. If you develop a following, if you start to have people contacting you, hey, I would love to sell you my stuff. If you start advertising, if you really get demand for these particular items to the point where you're starting to make real money, then you can look at opening up a brick and mortar retail store. And even then, I would probably tell you not to do it. Now, there is one caveat here. Let's say that you go this route, you start flipping these particular items, you become a true expert in this niche market to the point where you have now a social media following, you start a YouTube channel, and you end up with like 100, 200, 300,000 subscribers. Now, if you want to open up a brick and retail store, you have ad revenue coming in, you have money coming in from flipping this particular stuff on eBay and other sites. Now you're in a position to do this. There is literally no other exception to this rule. I don't care if you tell me that you have a net worth of $10 million. I'm here to tell you, if you really want to make a go of this and you want to make money doing this, do not open up a retail store. The opportunity cost, the time sink, just the amount of hours you're going to put in trying to build it is insane. For every successful business you see on YouTube, on the internet, there's 10 other failed businesses that no one's talking about because everybody already forgot them. If you don't believe me and you really want to challenge me on this, go and start visiting retail shops in your area that are run by mom and pops, whether they cater to Lego, comic books, collectible card games, vintage video games, and just start talking to these individuals. Better yet, I think it's Phoenix Resale. Doesn't he go out and he interviews people that do own video game stores, vintage stores, and the like? Go and watch some of his videos. You're going to see most people got very lucky, those that are successful in this realm. They will honestly tell you not to go in this direction. One of the things that happens is a lot of people think, well, if I open up a retail store and once a month somebody comes to me and let's say that you own a vintage video game shop, all is what I need is to get one pristine vintage PlayStation collection in my door or one pristine Sega Genesis vintage collection in my door per month, and I'm going to be doing really well. The problem is that is not a realistic goal, especially going back to one of the very first questions I answered in this segment was about how to be successful being an eBay reseller. Again, everybody knows the value of this stuff. That doesn't mean that opportunity isn't out there. It just means that there's a lot of competition along with that opportunity. You have to take that into account. Next question. Sean, regarding MTG, Magic the Gathering Finance, what's a better long-term hold? A Played Unlimited Black Lotus card or any PSA 10 Alpha Common? That's very easy. You want to go after the played unlimited Black Lotus. And the reason for that, even though it's played, even though it's from the Unlimited series, it is still a coveted Black Lotus card. There is very few out there, and they are coveted. You can make a case that a PSA 10 graded alpha common card is not common by any means because it's a PSA 10 graded card, but it is still a common. If you're investing in these markets, you have to look at rarity, scarcity, and demand. Always remember, guys, the secret to making money in the antiques and collectibles trade is demand at any given time. When somebody goes to the market, wants to invest in Magic the Gathering cards, they want the Black Lotus. They don't want the PSA 10 Alpha Common card at present time. So you want to go where the demand and overall rarity and scarcity is. Next question. Sean, could you do sort of a primer video on original comic book artwork? Okay, I have talked about this market in past videos. Then I got away from it a little bit because every time I put out a video on art, whether it's fine art, whether it's decorative art, whether it's high-end art that sells for millions upon millions of dollars, the view ratio is just not there. People even come into the comment section and go, what are you doing? I would rather you do a video on video games, comic books, Pokemon cards, and here you are talking about high-end art. That being said, I am going to do more videos on art because I do have a following of people that do watch my content specifically for my commentary on certain higher-end collecting categories, higher-end antiques, and even esoteric collecting categories. Now, you're probably wondering, well, Sean, I didn't ask about high-end art. I didn't even ask about fine art. I'm asking about comic book art. What I would like to do is a video where I compare the dynamics of the fine art market and compare it to that of original comic book art, just to show you guys how similar and how different those markets are and how they are overall perceived differently by the higher end art community. So if that's something that you would be interested in, and you're still watching this video 32 minutes in, please let me know. Please let me know in the comment section below, and I will make that a reality for you. Next question, and this is probably going to be one of my last questions because I've already been speaking for over 32 minutes here. Sean, love your content. Here is my question. Heard from you lately that the definition of a collectible was something like something that originally was sold at one price and with that could be sold for more. Well, here, let me stop you right there. The simple definition of a collectible is something that is selling for more on the secondary market than it originally sold for at retail. So for instance, if we're talking comic books, and let's say you have a comic book and the cover price originally was 25 cents for that comic book. So we're talking mid-Bronze Age comic book. It can be any comic book. If that comic book, if the value of that item is simply $1, it is selling for more than its original retail price. Therefore, it meets the definition of being collectible. Now, you go on to ask, does this mean that collectibles and money must always be attached? Given your definition, the definition that I just said regarding collectibles is linked directly to its value. The answer is it's a little bit more complex because pretty much in the modern era, if you collect Pokemon, gotta catch them all, everybody considers Pokemon cards collectible regardless of value, even common cards. So the true definition of a collectible is simply an item that is selling for more on the secondary market than it once sold for. It could be an item that is still being mass produced at present time. It doesn't refer to age. When we look at antiques, the definition of an antique is an item that is 100 years of age or older. Remember, guys, when I use the term antique, antique does not devote an item of value. I want to make that very clear. All is what an antique is. It's an item that's 100 years of age or more. When we talk about collectible, though, you are correct. The monetary value of the item does come into question to define it as a collectible. That is the traditional definition of a collectible. Again, in the modern era, with mass-produced collectibles soaring, with people speculating on a lot of current in-production items, the definition is a little bit murky at present time. But the traditional definition of a collectible is simply an item that is selling for more on the secondary market than it originally retailed for. That's the end of part 3 of the 16,000 subscriber Q&A. Please let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. Thank you so much for your time.